Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sydney, and if you are new here, this is just a place where we can talk about true crime, spooky, scary stories, dark history, or anything else I got going on in my brain. It's been a little bit, and I will explain why at the end of the video, but I am very, very, very excited to get into today's video. We are going to be talking about old, haunted, abandoned hospitals. And I don't know why, but I'm obsessed with this topic. I had so much fun researching all of this stuff, and I hope that you guys enjoy. So this is exciting because before we get into the video, I want to talk about my own paranormal hospital experiences. I've been trying to find a place to kind of slide this in very casually, and I think it's the closest we're ever going to get. So the hospital I work at has been open since about the 1980s, so it's not that old by any means, but we used to house a lot of the greater Milwaukee area. Like, it used to be the hot spot, it used to be the hub, and now it's kind of like, it's not abandoned, but there are places where it is dead. Like, we have just empty rooms. Spooky to begin with, but it's fine. Where I work down in the lab. I work in the little basement area, and when I first started working there, I was just chilling, I was vibing, and I was like, I have to go to the bathroom. Can you show me where the bathroom is? The person training me was like, yeah, of course. Like, here's the bathroom. You can go here whenever you need to pee. And I'm like, great. So for the first 2 months, I didn't know there was another bathroom in our lab. So I'm peeing, I'm vibing. It's like 3 a.m. and I'm going to open the door. And I look up and there's a sign on the bathroom door that I never noticed. And it said, morgue bathroom. I'd been working at this hospital for 2 months. I didn't realize that we were smack dab next to the morgue. And since then, everything kind of makes sense. So when I talk to my coworkers, we kind of have shared experiences, which is how I validated that it's not just me being super paranoid. Throughout all shifts, but mostly the night shift, which is when I work the graveyard shift. There are times when I'm alone in the lab and when my coworkers are alone in the lab, but you can hear people walking behind. Or you can see something out of the corner of your eye walking by, and we think it's our other coworker, and we're turning. There's nobody fucking there. You can hear the doors opening and closing by themselves. Spooky ooky. I sometimes hear people talking, and it's not a voice that I'm familiar with. And nobody really comes to the basement. Nobody. You know who you're gonna hear. And sometimes you hear things that definitely aren't there. But I think the creepiest thing is there's a very specific smell that multiple coworkers and I have talked about. There's no rhyme or reason, but there's a very strong scent of baby powder, and it'll just bam, hit you in the face and then just go away. And to me, I feel smells are very connected to paranormal things. And again, since it's not just me, I feel like we have some ghosty ghouls just watching over us when we're doing our work, making sure that we're not fucking up anybody's test results. And I'm here for it. And I've never gotten a bad vibe in the hospital, besides the fact that work is a shit show, but that's besides the point. I've never gotten bad vibes from the environment that I work in. So I just want to share my little paranormal experiences before we get into today's video. Let's get into it. So before we really get into the meat and potatoes of today's video, I need to give you guys a tiny crash course on the Kirkbride method of treatment. Now, Thomas Kirkbride was an American psychologist in the 1800s. He had a theory that patients needed a few very specific things when living in a facility in order to thrive, and that was rest, routine, and cleanliness. And he really took to heart this theory, and he ended up having this entire plan built around these methods. And so he would go around to different places in America and actually help them design and build different facilities throughout the 19th century. The buildings he designed had what is called a bat wing type structure, and this made sure that there was proper air circulation and natural sunlight while still providing patients privacy and comfort. He also believed that facilities should be built on at least 100 acres of land with things like gardens, farms, and orchards. And this was for a couple different reasons. For one, of course, this provided a very pleasant, tranquil view for their patients, but also patients could help farm and help in the gardens. And this was, of course, something that Kirkbride believed could help with their treatment. Kirkbride also provided a very specific patient to staff member ratio in his methodology. And this was to make sure that, one, the staff members weren't getting overwhelmed by the amount of patients, but also to make sure that the patients had enough staff members around them to make sure that they were getting the utmost care. Even administrative duties were outlined very specifically in Kirkbride's method. But unfortunately, all of this entire methodology only works if it's being followed to a T. And as we'll see later down the line, this wasn't happening. These places were understaffed and overpopulated, and that leads to, of course, the neglect and mistreatment of patients. But anyway, now that we kind of know what's going on with the Kirkbride method, let's get into some haunted and abandoned hospitals. I'm gonna be honest with you guys right out of the gate. I actually don't know what the name of the sanatorium is, the first one we're gonna be talking about, because to me, it looks like it should be pronounced Tranquil Sanatorium. And it is in British Columbia, so I tried to look it up, like, how do I pronounce this? And it was saying Tranquille. And I'm like, that sounds like Spanish to me. So I'm gonna be calling it Tranquil Sanatorium. And this place has a very robust history dating back all the way to 1904. This project began with the meeting of the British Columbia Society of Prevention and Consumption of Other Forms of Tuberculosis. And they talked about wanting to build a hospital specifically for tuberculosis patients that was kind of isolated and away from the general population. The society was able to raise $58,000, which in today's money is over $1 million, and they ended up purchasing 600 acres of land in Kamloops, British Columbia. The Kind Edward Memorial Sanatorium officially opened their doors on November 28th of 1907. However, they did keep expanding and building the sanatorium until 1910. Once completed, the hospital had 360 beds, as well as a series of tunnels underneath the sanatorium that was used to transport things like goods and laundry and things like that. This sanatorium did follow the Kirkbride method, and their treatment plan included lots of rest, relaxation, and fresh air. In fact, the hospital was actually built with lots of different porches and verandas so that patients could sit and enjoy the fresh air. At its peak, the sanatorium on its grounds had gardens, a gym, homes, playgrounds, and even a fire station right on the property. I think it is worth noting here that there are conflicting reports about how patients were treated. In some sources, I was seeing that they were treated very well, 3 square meals, very healthy, active, trying to keep patients, as well taken care of as they could. But in other sources, I was seeing that they kind of isolated patients, which, to be fair, is kind of the point, they had tuberculosis. But even to the fact where, like, family members couldn't visit or bring their loved ones, like, things from their home, like little sentimental items. So it was the 1900s. It's hard to know for sure, but I did just want to put it out there. Anyway, they provided all of these services until the year 1958, until they temporarily closed, but that was pretty short-lived because they opened up just a year later, this time housing mostly mentally ill patients. This new project ran until about 1983, until the building was closed down for good, and it now sits abandoned. Tranquil Sanatorium is actually considered one of the most haunted places in all of Canada, and this is for pretty obvious reasons. We're talking about a place that was a home for many people with tuberculosis in a time where it was not curable. Probably the most infamous story that's come out of Tranquil Sanatorium is that a nurse was actually killed by one of her patients in the underground tunnels, and this was when they were operating as a mental health facility. Visitors say that they have actually heard blood-curdling screams that they think are from the nurse while they're traversing the tunnels. There are a slew of accounts from nurses that actually worked in the sanatorium throughout the 70s and 80s. They reported feeling like they were being watched a lot of the time. Things would be moved or misplaced. Not only that, but in some of the empty wards, they would sometimes be able to hear footsteps, which I think is really creepy. Patients kind of seem to be affected by the vibes of the sanatorium as well. Nurses reported that patients would sometimes be agitated or angry or sad for no reason at all. And these feelings and emotions would kind of dissipate as soon as they left the grounds of the sanatorium. And I feel like this account isn't as, valid as we might think. Of course, they are talking about people dealing with mental health issues, and are in a strange, weird environment and are at a hospital. So I think that this account kind of is just can be explained away with the fact that they're in a sanatorium in the 70s and 80s. Still wasn't the best time to be in a facility for mental health. So take that one with a grain of salt. Visitors that have visited the defunct sanatorium say that they can hear groans, moans, and most eerily of all, they can hear the squeaking of old gurneys being pushed around the facility. They've also reported things like apparitions and glowing orbs in abandoned parts of the wards. Not only that, but people say that there's usually a sudden change in temperature, as well as just a melancholic energy just within the walls of the sanatorium, which is understandable. People say that they kind of get a feeling of loneliness and sadness when they walk through the now empty halls. From what I can tell, it appears that there are plans to tear down Tranquille Sanatorium, but no official date has been set. But if you guys have information otherwise, please let me know because it was a little hazy. The Whittingham Hospital was opened in 1873 near Preston, Lancashire, England. I really hope I pronounced that right. Any British people, please don't be mad at me. I'm so sorry. When it first opened, this hospital had room to house about 1,100 patients, and they also decided to follow the Kirkbride method. At first, when the hospital opened, they just had the bare bones basics, a chapel, a recreational hall, and a farm. But then at its peak, there were things like a railway station, a brewery, a post office, an orchestra hall with room for a brass band, and a dance hall. They had like everything. They were set. And it's kind of cool because Whittingham Hospital is actually one of the first places that developed what we call like our modern day EEG, which is just something that is attached to the head and measures brainwave activity. During the 1950s, two doctors that worked at Whittingham actually made a prototype out of thrifted war surplus material and would test it on patients. And they kind of, tweaked and modified it into our modern day EEG. In fact, Whittingham actually had pretty cutting edge care. They were at kind of the forefront of modern medicine at the time. At least that's how it looked from the outside. But in 1967, a few nursing students came forward to tell the world how it actually was at Whittingham Hospital. According to these students, some patients were forced to stay outside, didn't matter the weather or the time of day. Others were locked in closets, cupboards, and bathrooms. Patients were served the minimal amount of food, and sometimes they were even fed slop instead of actual food. Additionally, the wards were evidently vermin-filled, and there was no type of temperature control. So it was either like hot as fuck, or freezing cold, or humid, or muggy. It just wasn't a good environment for people to get better. There are stories of patients being dragged around by their hair, being choked with wet towels and bed sheets. And there's even a story I could not believe was real at first, but evidently two male nurses lit a male patient on fire. This place was a living nightmare, but thankfully, because of these nursing students who came forward to bring all of this to the light, something was done to end this abusive treatment of patients. Two of the head nurses ended up leaving the facility, and other nurses, a number of them, were charged with crimes for their abuse and neglect. Whittingham Hospital officially closed in 1995 and now sits abandoned. And there are kind of the run-of-the-mill paranormal stories out of this place, disembodied footsteps, distant screaming, orbs, that kind of thing. But I think what's truly eerie about this place is its dark history. And I just kind of want to talk about some of the things that people have actually found while exploring this abandoned hospital. There was a blog post that I read from this woman who talked to somebody who had actually went to Whittingham and kind of explored the abandoned rooms. And they stumbled across a room that was used for patients who were on their deathbed. From what I understood, this room was almost completely bare, but there was a bed covered in a red cloth, a pillow, and a crucifix above the bed. All of the windows were boarded up except for one window that kind of looked out on the entire property. It was a very peaceful scene. But this was the place where a lot of patients that were on their deathbed, this was their final spot. This is where they took their final breaths. And so I have to imagine the vibes and the energy in this room have to be extremely intense. Then there are the tunnels running underneath Whittingham Hospital, which was confirmed to be kind of the transportation area for dead bodies. And people that have visited and walked through these tunnels claim that there are body bags just laying around down there, which is disgusting. And I would be out of there so fast, let me tell you. The Athens Lunatic Asylum first opened in 1874, and it housed everyone from Civil War veterans to the mentally ill to violent criminals. And I guess it hasn't really come up yet, but I'm sure most of us know that certain conditions back in the day, even if they were mild, you could be admitted to a facility for. For example, things like epilepsy, menstrual and menopausal issues, alcohol abuse, substance abuse, they were all grounds to be admitted to a place like Athens. Athens Lunatic Asylum had 87 buildings on their property and could house 1,800 patients by the 1950s, which is insane to think about. That to even think about like staffing or running a place like that, I can't even imagine that. Athens is known for the different treatments that they use for their patients. Unfortunately, those treatments are definitely giving American Horror Story Asylum, is giving strong asylum vibes, which this has nothing to do with anything. I mean, I guess it does. It's the topic of the video. If you haven't seen American Horror Story and you're like, that's not really my vibe, trust me, you don't even have to watch season 1. Like, you don't have to watch it. Watch season 2, Asylum. And this is old news, obviously, but it is so good. It is so fucking good. Oh my God. It's one of the best like pieces of horror I've seen in a long time. Entertaining. But anyway, let's get back to what we're actually talking about. This facility was most well known, I guess, if you want to put it that way, for their use of lobotomies. And if you don't know what a lobotomy is, it was basically something used in the 1900s to treat things like schizophrenia and OCD, and it was done in a few different ways. The original way to do a lobotomy was to drill a hole in the skull to the brain and sever connections within the frontal lobe. And that was, thought to kind of help the brain treat itself. But as this procedure gained popularity, there became a faster, easier way to do it, which was just to take an object that looked like an ice pick type deal and just get to the brain from the eye socket. Electroshock therapy was another very common method of treatment at Athens. And when they first started using this method, a lot of patients were getting injured with like fractures and broken bones because the entire body, all of your muscles tense up when you're given shocks. And so it resulted in a lot of injuries. But as this method became more sophisticated and people started to know more about it, a muscle relaxer was usually given to patients in order to prevent these types of injuries. And there was this account, I can't remember where I read it now, but there was this firsthand account of somebody that was staying at Athens, and they were talking about how they were there for those electric shock therapy treatments, and they would kind of round everybody up, take them into this big room, and one by one kind of give them these electroshocks. They could tell the people that hadn't gotten the therapy before, or it was like their first or second time, because they would be resisting and yelling and, not wanting this therapy. But then the people that had been on this treatment for a while were just very like numb to it and would just kind of go into the area to get their electroshocks. So switching gears a little bit, in December of 1978, it came out publicly that there was a missing patient at Athens named Margaret Schilling. And evidently, employees did an entire search of the grounds and they could not find Margaret. Unfortunately, 42 days later, Margaret's body was found on the top floor of Building 20 at Athens Lunatic Asylum. And the way that her body was found was very strange. She was found nude with her arms crossed like this over her chest and her clothes folded neatly beside her. The doctors said that she died from heart failure, but I don't know. It seems very odd. Like, I couldn't find much of anything about Margaret Schilling's life before her time in the asylum or even her time in the asylum. But it seems just very strange that you would be in this abandoned part of the asylum by yourself, and then you would proceed to unclothe yourself, cross your arms, and die. I don't know. especially from something like heart failure. Usually that's pretty sudden. You can't really feel that coming on, from what I understand. This day, if you go to the top level of Building 20, you can see the faded outline of where her body was laying on the concrete. Visitors of Athens say that you can actually sometimes see Margaret wandering around the halls of the asylum. Now, that was kind of a little taste of what we're going to be talking about next. This has to be the most haunted place we are talking about today. And what I find crazy about this whole situation is that Ohio University actually owns Athens Lunatic Asylum, or what used to be Athens. Not only that, but they actually use some of the old buildings for things like classrooms and dorm rooms. And when I read this, because I was just purely looking at it from like, oh, it's an abandoned, haunted old asylum. Creepy. And then I was like looking it up, where are we at today? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, it's something called the Ridges now. And I was like, that doesn't sound very abandoned to me. And then I was like, people are actually living in this old ass fucking hospital. I was blown away. If I got accepted to Ohio University and I was like, yay, my college career. And then they told me, yeah, you're going to be staying in this dorm room that used to be part of this asylum. It's actually pretty haunted. I'd be like, yeah, I'm not staying there. I'm not going there. I'll go somewhere else. Thanks for the opportunity, but no thank you, girly. So people have reported hearing footsteps, screams, whispers, clanking chains, the whole 9 yards. Everything you can imagine, they've seen it. And of course, apparitions and orbs have also been seen throughout the property. But let's talk about one specific building on what used to be the old Athens Lunatic Asylum, and that is Wilson Hall. So to start off with, this building is evidently located in the center of a pentagram that's created by 5 cemeteries in the area. So there's cemetery here, 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 here. Not a good start, okay. There's one room in particular in Wilson Hall that has a very heavy history, and that is room 428. In the 1970s, a male student died under mysterious circumstances in that room. And then fast forward to 2019, a female student who was staying in that room took her life. So people that have stayed in room 428 say that they can hear voices and screaming, and objects will just move on their own, and the door will periodically open and shut all on its own. And since then, Ohio University has officially decided to close up that room. Nobody can stay there just because it has such a heavy history, and I think they just kind of want to contain the vibes. And you know, I definitely understand that, like, since the history is pretty well known. I just don't know why any student would really want to stay in there. So to me, it definitely makes sense why the university was like, let's just close it, lock the door, throw away the key. Convocation Hall is another paranormal hotspot on the property. In 1982, a female student was stabbed in her dorm room, and she was actually stabbed by her boyfriend, who was a former student at Ohio University. The apparition of this female student can be seen sometimes walking through the halls of this dorm building. Then there's another story of a male student that died in his sleep while staying in this dorm building, and students that are staying there now say that they can sometimes feel this male student's presence in their bed, kind of like behind them or hugging them at night. There are countless stories coming out of Athens. I kind of had to just pick and choose a couple because there are just so many, and it definitely makes sense. Like I've said before, if you have a rich and diverse history, there are going to be a lot of spirits just hanging out in that area, and that can definitely be said about Athens Lunatic Asylum. Well, that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you for joining me on this little journey of haunted asylums and hospitals. This was so fun to research. I had such a blast. I haven't said that in a while. I've had a very good time researching this. I enjoyed it a lot. We've been talking about some heavy hitters, you know, Sade Robinson, obviously, the whole Frankie Hildebrandt situation. This was a much needed break. I have to say, I feel rejuvenated. I feel renewed. I appreciate you sticking around for the whole ass video. If you're still here, I appreciate you. And if you've been sticking around for the random sporadic uploads, I also really appreciate you, because I have not the mental health's been in the shitter. I'm not even gonna lie to you guys. Like, I have just been, like I said at the beginning of the video, I work night shift. So I've literally been like waking up, eating, going to work, sleeping. That's it. That is it. And at my workplace right now, we're going through this like crazy situation that I don't really want to get into because I don't know if I can. But it's been wild, and so I appreciate you sticking around. I love each and every one of you. I hope that your May is going well. I hope your spring is going beautifully. I want to know what you guys are doing for your spring. Are you doing anything fun? Do you have any summer plans? Oh, I just want to talk about it. I want to talk about it. But anyway, I appreciate you guys. How many times can I say that? I love you to bits and pieces. And keep being the bad bitches that you are. Goodbye, guys.